Welcome to the Shift Report, the podcast from MCentric and the MCentric Foundation. MCentric is the go-to information and resources hub designed exclusively for the emergency medicine community. We regularly host key leaders from the field who share their insights and experience. Our goal is to inform our listeners and to encourage you to use what you learn to improve your practice and improve yourself. To learn more, please visit us at mcentric.org. Today's episode is sponsored by Lotus Clinician Wellbeing. Lotus Clinician Wellbeing provides consulting services designed to prioritize clinician wellness in order to provide the best care for their patients. Lotus Clinician Wellbeing supports healthcare professionals with personalized coaching and consulting services for groups and individuals in areas such as career development, leadership, burnout prevention, practice management, and more. For more information, visit lotusclinicianwellbeing.com. Today, we welcome Torree McGowan. Dr. McGowan lives and works in Central Oregon, a lovely part of the world, and she's a distinguished Air Force veteran with the first areas of expertise in and around emergency medicine. When MCentric heard her speaking about fatigue, we jumped at the opportunity to learn more about a subject near and dear to all of us in healthcare. Welcome, Torree.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for taking the time to explore this with us. In hearing you speak and reading your bio, you have a big, diverse background. You have lots of expertise that one might expect from someone with your emergency medicine and military background. We want to explore a little bit about your analysis of the fatigue issue, which is real in emergency medicine and across healthcare.
Yeah.
But tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are. You're an Air Force Academy graduate and served our country and became an emergency physician. Tell us how you ended up in emergency medicine and how you ended up where you are now.
As you mentioned, I'm an Air Force Academy graduate, and then the Air Force was kind enough to send me to a civilian medical school. So I completed medical school at Oregon Health and Sciences in Portland, Oregon. Then I did my emergency medicine training with the San Antonio Uniformed Services program and trained at Wilford Hall back when it was actually a hospital, as well as Brooke Army Medical Center. I then spent 12 years on active duty with deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. And then when I left active duty, I served in the Oregon Air National Guard for about 7 years. Probably my most interesting role with the Oregon Guard was I commanded our CBRNE Enhanced Response Force Package, or SURF-P unit, which is an all-hazard disaster response unit during COVID. So being in charge of the biological response for the state of Oregon during the largest activation of National Guardsmen since World War II and commanding the mass vaccine center in Portland was a really interesting experience.
That's great. One thing many of our listeners know, or some do, I'm in the Washington, D.C. area and know acronyms pretty well. For those that don't, can you say what CBRNE stands for?
CBRNE is chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and high explosive.
Yes.
So
yes.
All of the bad things that go wrong that we are looking out for, and basically have to have special training for addressing those threats.
Thank you. And we have obviously some disaster experts among our listeners and among our podcast guests. And those are all the bad things they're not all the bad things we prepare for, but there are a lot of them. So thank you for that. And you have a number of areas based on that military service and your background in emergency preparedness, disaster response, and others that you have clear expertise on. One of the things of your areas of interest, among a number, is fatigue. And you spoke at ASAP, and I assume you have spoken at other places. This was not the first time you've clearly addressed this issue. Fatigue in healthcare is a big issue in many ways. It probably starts before training, but
Absolutely.
we there's sleep deprivation, there's change in circadian rhythm cycles, there's just physical fatigue from physically demanding jobs. Tell us a little bit about your analysis of fatigue and how it affects emergency physicians.
Well, one of the ways that I came about having fatigue as such an interest of mine is actually based from when I was at the Air Force Academy. So a good friend of mine graduated the same year that I did, and he went off and flew F-15s for the Air Force, and I went to medical school. And so he was doing pilot training while I was doing medical school and residency. And he would say, I'm into my 8 hours of mandatory crew rest. I've got to go take a nap. And I said, I'm on hour 36 of my shift. And as we have matured in our careers together, Jeremy is now a nationally recognized expert on fatigue and aviation safety and works for the pilots union. And he and I have collaborated a lot together talking about how aviation has done a really good job at making things safer. And one of the ways that they have done that is they really focus on how fatigue affects their ability to perform at high levels. And contrasting to that, we don't look at it at all. One thing that I like to think about is when there is an incident in aviation, one of the specific things that they look at was, did this happen during a window of low circadian? So one of the times of day that we expect you to be more tired, that's between 3 and 5 in the morning and 3 and 5 in the afternoon. Did it happen during those times? Had you been on shift for a long time? Did you get enough sleep the night before? And they are specifically looking at those issues every single time an incident happens. Now, when we look at errors in medicine, we don't even look at what time of day it happened, for the most part. But we know, based on studies, that 60% of needle sticks happen between midnight and 6 a.m. It's not 60% of the hours, and it's not 60% of what we're doing, but it's an outsized risk to us that we aren't even aware of for the most part. And so when I start talking about fatigue, we all know that we're tired, but we don't understand those risks that it puts not just us, but our patients as well.
That's a great insight, and we can delve into this in a bit more detail. I think we've all had the experience. If you travel a lot, you
Yeah,
have had a potential delay in your travel because the crew times out, and by FAA rules, in civil aviation as opposed to military aviation, the crew times out, and they absolutely can't fly because they've been going too long. And as you point out, we've got nothing like that in medicine. Although, in our lifetimes, the residency rules changed based on some findings of fatigue. And I'm sure that has played into your analysis.
absolutely. And one of the funny things that is interesting about that, so we do have some rules, and those are the rest rules for residents only, but not for attending physicians. We'll let you work yourself into the ground when you've graduated from residency. When we look at aviation, the most that a commercial airline pilot is allowed to fly in a year is 1,000 hours. That's their hard stop. 1,000 hours is what they're allowed to fly. If you do the math on what we will allow residents to work, that's 4,160 hours. You can't tell me that we're safe in doing that type of fatigue. And part of the problem is fatigue is really, really complicated. We all kind of think that we understand what it means to be tired, but there's so many different pieces of fatigue that work on us that are happening in the background that we don't recognize. One of the reasons that we don't recognize it is fatigue works on that prefrontal cortex in your brain. So exactly like alcohol, it impairs our ability to understand how tired we are. So the more tired you get, you don't feel more tired and you don't understand how badly your performance is impaired, which is really dangerous. We get fatigued because of just being awake. So that is what we call acute fatigue. There is time on task fatigue. So the more number of decisions that you have to make, the more fatigued you get. So that's why when we talk about what's the optimal shift length, some places, if you're seeing 4 or 5 patients in a day, 24 hours is probably fine. But if you're seeing 4 or 5 patients in an hour, you use up that cognitive bandwidth, that number of decisions per day, pretty quickly. And I think we've probably all felt this because I know that when I come home from a shift that's been really busy, my husband will say, "What do you want for dinner?" And I say, "I can't make another decision. I'm done." And he gets really frustrated with me. He's like, it's not a hard question. And I'm like, at this point, it is. I'm done making decisions for the day. And that's the kind of decision fatigue that we get into. Then we get into stacking shifts. So that becomes cumulative fatigue. So if we are not sleeping well over several days, you get more and more tired and you perform worse and worse over those several days of even just an hour or two of less sleep. All of that works together to impair our performance. And it impairs our performance in a lot of ways. We don't think as fast. We don't remember as well. Our brains don't adjust to new information, or cognitive flexibility is the word that they talk about. We don't do that as well. There was a really interesting study that just came out within the last couple of months that looked at our moral compass, which is a little bit uncomfortable for us, but we actually make worse ethical decisions when we are fatigued, when we are taking care of patients. And I know that's when I saw that study come out, I said, yeah, that feels really true for me, that I know that at 6 o'clock in the morning when you come in, I'm probably not as kind, and I'm a lot more likely to go ahead and give that antibiotic prescription rather than having that long discussion about why you probably don't need it for your bronchitis. We are physically worse. Fine motor skills are worse. Gross motor skills are worse. You are as impaired as a drunk driver after 24 hours of continuous wakefulness. But again, we don't understand that and we don't see that in ourselves. And so that's what makes it really dangerous, because there's so much about it and we're also so bad at understanding it.
Lots of this is alarming. Your one that's I think people will find particularly alarming is the moral compass thing, because people that don't understand this may say, well, yeah, I'm tired. And yeah, maybe I may slip a little bit on fine motor skills or something, but I'm still going to be morally right and or ethically right or whatever it is. And even as you say, even that slips at certain times. So it's not so much a skill level, it's the sort of the guts of your decision making
Yeah.
um, that can slip, and that is truly alarming. This is, as you mentioned earlier, we all know about the rules changes among for residents, and they have a certain prescribed number of hours. One can argue whether those hours are physiologically appropriate or not,
Right.
but they're a lot better than the hours used to be. The joke used to be that for people that worked, if you're a surgical resident and worked every other night, the only problem was you missed half the good cases, which
Absolutely.
sort of a morbid joke. But when you get out into practice and you're away from residency, as you point out, those don't apply, and you have pressures, seeing lots of patients, meeting metrics, and probably even making money to pay off loans and other things by picking up extra shifts. Talk about that a little bit and what you've seen among young attending staff who were hour restricted, now aren't, and mistakes they can make.
It's a really tough thing because we have such pressures to pick up extra shifts and to do more, and we all want to be part of the team. And unfortunately, sometimes that happens. And one thing that is important to remember is you get worse at this as you get older. So I know that night shifts in my 20s, I was a lot more tolerant of them. Now that I'm in my 40s, I don't tolerate night shifts near as well as I used to. So some of that is understanding what you can tolerate and what you can't tolerate as you do that. It's also a mind shift, and it's an interesting mind shift because, again, I'm going to talk a little bit about the aviation experience. My friend Jeremy shared with me his work iPad, the front page of it. And the opening screen of his iPad is their fatigue checklist. Did I get enough sleep last night? Do I feel rested? Do I feel well? Do I have any reason that I can't safely complete this flight today? And if any of those things are yes, if they don't feel like they can safely complete that flight, it is their duty to say, I am not okay, and I need you to find somebody else to fly this. Now, part of the system that supports that is Airlines understand that, and they actually have extra people just kind of sitting around to fill that in. There's not a lot of them, and that's why we get flights canceled and things like that. But they build in a bit of a safety net for that. And pilots understand that their job is to be safe. We don't talk about that in medicine at all. I was on one of the groups in Facebook, and they were talking about my nephew is supposed to have a birthday in between my night shifts, and my mom's really upset because I can't come to the nephew's birthday party. Should I go ahead and go to the birthday party in the middle of my night shifts, but I'm only going to sleep 2 hours on each side of that? That is so incredibly unsafe. But those are the sorts of things that we really have the conversation about. Okay, is that an okay thing? In aviation, that is 100% not okay. Their job is to be behind a door and sleeping for the 8 hours prior to their duty period. But we schedule everything into it. We allow administration to schedule meetings for us and then give us a hard time when we don't come to the meetings between our night shifts. We let family schedule things into our days when we're between night shifts. That's probably one of the biggest things that I've done as I've started talking more about fatigue and understanding it more. I actually block my days in the middle of my night shifts, and I put a block on my calendar that says sleep, because it's really easy to stick something in there and say, oh, I could just run and do that dental appointment. It's not a big deal. It is a big deal. And it's a big deal on both sides of that for your health as well as the safety of your patients. But just putting that visual thing in there that you said, I'm going to prioritize being safe and being healthy, and I'm going to decide to schedule that on a different day, is a really powerful tool to help prioritize that sleep for you.
Great. I think people that listen to this are going to see this within themselves and within many, many people they know. A couple of things to ask about. One is sort of the toxic is a word that can be applied to it, is the expectation, particularly among from older people who trained in a certain way and worked in a certain way, that, well, I did it, so you do it and you're going to be fine. You've clearly, I'm sure, dealt with that. We all have. What is the status of that? It seems to be alive and well.
It is alive and well, and I get really frustrated with it. And I tend to look at that and say, you know what? We know better than to continue to perpetuate generational trauma. Just because it was done doesn't mean it should be done and continued. The other part of that is I would also argue that medicine has changed. The amount of information and processing that you have to do, and the amount of coordination and communication that is required of physicians nowadays is exponentially higher than it was when I started 20 years ago. The amount of text messages and inbox messages and computer messages and click boxes in your EMR that you have to manage is so much higher than it used to be. And every one of those, again, is a decision that you have to make. That is one tiny piece of that cognitive bandwidth that you used up every time you have to do that. And so, yes, people used to do 20-hour shift or 24-hour shifts or 48-hour shifts. I think that time has changed because there's a lot less downtime in those 48 hours, and especially in emergency medicine as we all get busier and have more to do. The complexity of the patients and the complexity of the things that we are doing is also a lot higher. The amount of information that we have to process because we know more. The amount of medical knowledge in the past 20 years, just even in the past 5 years with everything that COVID has taught us, has changed so much. The amount of knowledge that you have to process every day is so much higher that those old rules really don't seem to apply anymore. Another piece of this that is really interesting and that has really kind of helped me get my mind around how I think about managing my own fatigue is something very basic about fatigue at the genetic level. So everything that we're talking about here about sleep and fatigue and how you manage it is really, really strongly genetically based. A lot of the genes for circadian rhythm are actually the same between fruit flies all the way up through humans. There is something really important about this system that we are in, this circadian rhythm, that was important enough to keep it all the way from fruit flies all the way to us. And so trying to change that is really hard. And the types of things that are baked into your genetics about fatigue are you a morning person or a night person? I am a really strong night owl. So if you leave me alone and let me assume my normal sleep pattern, I will go to bed around midnight or 1. I will wake up around 9 in the morning, and I am happiest between about 8.5 to 9 hours of sleep.
Mm-hmm.
If I get less than that, I am, especially if it's a couple of days, I am really not fit to live with. Now, my husband, on the other hand, he does fine on about 6 hours of sleep. It's really annoying to me because I'd really like those extra 3 hours to be able to do things in my life. But I've also understood that no matter how hard I try to change that genetic tendency, I can't change my genetics. That I am somebody who needs 8.5 to 9 hours of sleep a day. I've also, again, been able to, this is one of the best things that's happened recently. My kids are in high school now, and so they're kind of, they don't need me as much to get them going out the door in the morning. So I have now switched to, I work evenings and nights.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't work any day shifts because if you need me to be up and functional at 7 in the morning, it is really hard for me. That is in the middle of my normal sleep, at my deepest part of my sleep when I should be in REM or stage 4. I don't even make words until about 9:30 or 10 in the morning. And so trying to force me to do it, I can do it and I can entrain myself. And there are different ways that you can change your sleep pattern, but it's going against your normal genetics. And you can do it for a while as long as you are very dedicated to it. But as soon as you stop, and we all know this, so if your alarm is going off at 5:30 in the morning every morning and you're dragging yourself out of bed to go to work, and then on the weekend or your day off, you sleep until 10, that's telling you you've got some chronic sleep deprivation that's going on there, and you're probably fighting against your natural circadian rhythm or your natural, what we call a chronotype, trying to basically force your genetics to do something else. That is really, really hard for your body to do. And so as I have started to understand that, I'm a lot kinder to myself. And I say, you know what? I'm not going to schedule things where I'm only getting 7 hours of sleep a night. I'm going to make sure I go to bed early enough. And I'm also going to structure my schedule so that I don't have to get up early in the morning and I can sleep in and I feel better that way. And the nice part about that is there's a very nice distribution naturally of morning people and night owls. And there's actually extreme, what I like to call the bats. You know, we have the larks, the owls, and the bats.
Right.
There are people whose natural sleep, they are the best during the daytime and they are the most awake during the nighttime. It's about 2 to 3% of the population. That's probably our nocturnists that are okay doing that. And if you allow your group to kind of self-select into those groups, you'll find that for the most part, you get almost all of your shifts covered without messing with people's sleep schedules so much.
Great advice. And so I'd like to focus a little bit on kind of at the individual level and the group level from you're sitting in front of people and advising them. Consistent with our work as we build out the M-Centric Foundation, we're looking at wellness as a big issue. And fatigue and sleep cycles and all the things you've talked about are an important part of an individual's wellness and the wellness that leads to a continued thriving in our profession. So
Yeah.
you pretend you're sitting in front of some relatively junior attendings who are suddenly thrust into working irregular schedules, more irregular than they were as residents, and feeling the pressures that we all feel. What are a few things that you would tell a group, much like what you've told us? How would you advise them on how to really improve their lives based on fatigue issues?
So this is not the talk that you saw, but I have a whole nother talk about how to sleep better during your night shifts and how to manage that. but I'll give you the highlights. Um, First of all, we talked about it a little bit. Prioritize it. And sometimes that means that somebody else is managing childcare. Any of the EM moms that are out there that say, I'm going to work a nocturnist schedule so that I can be home and take care of my toddler, that is, they use sleep deprivation as torture.
Mm-hmm.
Truly, you are torturing yourself by doing that. Nanny, daycare, all of those things are very reasonable. And don't let society or your mother-in-law or your spouse or whomever tell you, well, you're home. Why can't you just watch the kid? It's not like you're working. Yes, you are. Your job is to sleep so that you can be safe for your next shift. So investing in your sleep is important. Some of that is schedule management. And unfortunately, as a new attending, you don't have a ton of opportunity to manage your schedule a lot of times. If you can tolerate a nocturnist schedule and they'll let you pick that schedule, play around with it and see what works best for you. Some people, if they can flip all the way onto a nighttime schedule and keep that for several weeks, that works really well for some people. If you can't keep for several weeks, about 3 night shifts in a row is about the longest to be safe. That is based on when we look at people who are working night shifts, about 2/3 to 3/4 of them will flip back onto a daytime schedule when they're not on nights. So even if you're a nocturnist, almost everybody flips back onto a daytime schedule. And when we look at that, when we look at the nights that they're working, they get 1.6 hours fewer sleep or less sleep, 1.6 fewer hours of sleep on the days that they are working than on their days off. So every day that you're working, you are losing 1.6 hours of sleep. After 3 nights, that's a 6-hour sleep deficit. That's almost an entire night that you've gone without sleep. And that's when we're starting to get into the really unsafe territory. So about 3 nights maximum is for most people. Making sure that your schedule is always moving forward. So if you should always go from a day shift to an evening shift to a night shift. The research says it takes about 4 days to recover from a night shift, all the way to be back to your full functioning. So making sure that you are going in a forward rotation and then getting enough days off after your night shift. And again, a lot of that's your scheduler, but send them this and there's good research on how to schedule this as to create a schedule that is least painful for your people. Other things that you can do on an individual level that make a big difference. Your room should be dark. I don't know if you can see behind me, Till.
Mm-hmm.
My room
Yes.
is always blacked out. I have these wonderful blackout curtains. There is the brightest thing in my room is the light on my smoke detector. And the only reason I can still see it is because I have vaulted ceilings and I can't get up there to put a little piece of tape over the top of it. Complete darkness when you are sleeping during the daytime versus bright light at night if you're working a night shift, 2 hours difference. 7.7 hours of sleep versus 5.7 hours of sleep, just by getting blackout curtains for your room. Putting on sunglasses when you're driving home from your night shift can be really helpful. So sunlight is a very potent suppressor of melatonin. So melatonin is our sleep chemical. Follows a nice circadian rhythm. It's usually coming up at night and going down during the day. But when you are sleeping out of cycle, so when you're on a night shift, your melatonin is building up as you are getting more tired and getting ready to go home. If you walk outside and that sunlight hits you, that melatonin starts to go down. So just using sunglasses can help make sure that you're ready to go to bed when you get home. Blue light blocking glasses while you're on shift can also help. Just those silly little blue light blockers that you can buy on Amazon, 40 minutes more of sleep between your night shifts. Little things like that can make a big difference, and none of it fixes everything, but every little piece of that helps. There are a lot of new technologies coming out that I'm excited about for the sleep nerds like me, in different ways that you can shift your sleep and actually shift your sleep cycles. So when you're going into REM and when you're going into stage 4, that's probably a whole nother conversation to have. But the easy things that you can do on your next shift dark, uh, dark bedroom, sunglasses driving home, blue light blocking glasses can make a huge difference in your sleep.
That's great advice for the individuals, and for groups, a lot of those things apply for scheduling, and really thinking about this and what you're doing to your staff and trying to optimize this. You mentioned the quality parameters, and there's lots of applications of aviation safety to medicine. That's another entire discussion that's fascinating, applying the standards the aviation industry has applied beyond just fatigue, but to
Right.
other hazard-free things. Um, but you mentioned that there's a disproportionate number of incidents that occur at certain times, and using that, is that something you suggest to groups to sort of analyze errors and analyze quality with that in mind?
Absolutely. And again, when we're looking at aviation versus medicine, we know that the window of low circadian, especially the nighttime window of low circadian, so 3 to 5 in the morning is when most people are the most tired. And it's really dangerous. The Exxon Valdez error, Exxon Valdez oil spill, Chernobyl meltdown, 3 Mile Island meltdown, um, the Libby Zion case, that medication error happened during the window of low circadian.
Hmm.
We know that it's a really dangerous time. Aviation, interestingly, they understand it and they do what are called augmented operations. So if you are flying during the window of low circadian, they actually make sure that there's an extra pilot available. They increase their staffing to help mitigate that risk of fatigue and have more brains working on the problem. We do exactly the opposite in medicine. We skeleton crew overnight, but people still decide to have their car accidents or whatever in the middle of the night. So we still have to work. And so we do exactly the opposite in decreasing our staffing and making sure that there are fewer people, less backup during those dangerous times. Unfortunately, that's kind of a hard nut to crack, partly because it's so endemic in our system. But there are a few things that you can do, and this becomes a little bit of a culture change in your group. First of all, napping is really powerful. Just a 20-minute nap can actually improve your performance about 30%.
Hmm.
And you can actually learn how to take a perfect nap. So, do you want the quick spiel on the perfect nap?
Sure. Perfect nap.
Okay.
Perfect nap is always a great way to
The
put
perfect
this
nap.
out.
It's all about caffeine and duration. So, the underlying principle of the perfect nap is the idea of sleep inertia. So, we all know what sleep inertia feels like, right? When you get out of bed and you don't know what planet you're on and you like run into the bathroom door on your way into the bathroom, you can't make words. Like I said, I don't make words for the first couple hours I'm awake. That's sleep inertia. And when we look at sleep patterns, sleep inertia tends to hit when you've been asleep for more than about 20 minutes. If you've slept for more than an hour, your sleep inertia is about 20 minutes long for the average person. Between 20 minutes and 60 minutes of sleep, your sleep inertia is about 10 minutes. But if you only sleep for 20 minutes, you have no sleep inertia. So you wake up and you're ready to go. And one of the interesting parts about that is people will say, when they do these studies, they say, I didn't sleep at all. I feel, I just opened my eyes and I'm right here. Part of that is because you didn't feel like you slept because you woke up and you were ready to go. We're used to sleep inertia. We're used to that feeling of slowly stretching and getting out of bed. But just that 20 minutes makes a big difference. So 20 minutes is your goal for how long you want to sleep. Average sleep latency, so when you lay down and close your eyes, is about 5 minutes. So to take the perfect nap, you get 200 milligrams of your favorite caffeinated beverage, whatever that is. You drink your 200 milligrams. Absorption into the bloodstream is about 25 to 30 minutes for your caffeine. You set your alarm for 25 minutes and you lay down and you close your eyes. 5 minutes of sleep latency, 20 minutes of nap. Your alarm goes off right as that caffeine is hitting your bloodstream, and you are not into your sleep inertia. And that's the perfect nap.
That's outstanding.
And if I know that I have to do something during that time period, I will often say, hey, I'm going to go in the back for 20 minutes. And there are some places that you can't manage that. And bless your soul if you're living in a place like that. But I don't work in a place like that. I can almost always take 20 minutes, go in the back and close my eyes. And I am so much more ready to come back and be awake and ready for that. So that can be a really powerful tool, using your sleep inertia or using your perfect nap. Another thing that you can do is try to decide, do I really have to do this when I am really tired? So in our group, we've actually started more of a culture of, you know what, I've got a pediatric sedation for a arm fracture, but it's 5:36 in the morning and my replacement's coming in an hour. In my group, it is perfectly acceptable to say, you know what, I'm going to wait till that next doc is here and we're going to do it together because they are rested and I am not. And we don't look at that as I'm weak, I can't do this by myself. We look at that as a patient safety. So we try to use that idea of augmented operations by accepting a little bit more length of stay, but waiting so that another physician can be there and help us share that mental load. And again, that's a cultural shift to say, we're going to be okay with that. And I am perfectly happy when I'm the first one, when I'm there and I'm fresh and ready to go. You bet. Let me take that one for you.
This has all been wonderful, very important safety information and the perfect nap and lots of other great insights about truly something that is so basic and fundamental to our health and wellness that we have very little understanding of, and in fact abuse in our professional lives.
Right.
So
Well, and
thank you.
we've been told for so long, well, if you're just tougher, if you just work harder, why do you need so much sleep? Well, unfortunately, for somebody who I sleep on the longer end of, on that, I need more sleep than the average bear. After having been told for so many years, why do you sleep so much? Now I'm just like, it is what it is. And I don't feel guilty about it anymore, but man, I give myself a lot more grace and I start to structure around that and understanding that other people have have similar limitations, that they don't feel good in the evening. Great. Let me take that evening shift. Let's do that.
And happily, and thank you for all that. You've learned from science why you are the way you are and how to optimize your health and well-being and your performance. And many who are listening can now realize, oh, I can take that science and I can learn from Torree how to optimize my health and my well-being and my patient safety. So thank you for that. As people move forward, how can they find out more about your work and what you do? Website, LinkedIn, otherwise we'll post a little bit of that in the show notes, but how can people learn more about this from you and your colleagues?
I speak about this on a fairly regular basis at various conferences. ASAP has been kind enough to let me speak about it several times. My friend Jeremy and I, that I spoke about earlier, that's the pilot, we actually had a great opportunity to talk about some of those aviation lessons, and fatigue is a huge piece of that at ASAP as well. My website is erdisasterdoc.com. And I, unfortunately, as you found out, man, I love talking about fatigue. So people are welcome to email me and we'll talk until I put you to sleep. That's actually one of the best lectures to give, because if I put someone to sleep in my lecture, I actually take it as a compliment, because now they're getting a little bit of fatigue mitigation.
That's great. Well, thanks very much, Torree, for taking the time to speak with us today and sharing some very, very important insights that really affect us all. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for letting me come on. It was a great time.
And thank you for joining us in this installment of our M-Centric podcast series, The Shift Report. And special thanks to Dr. Torree McGowan for sharing her important insights. For more content, networking, and innovation in the world of emergency medicine, please visit mcentric.org. And another thank you to our sponsor, Lotus Clinician Wellbeing. Learn more at lotusclinicianwellbeing.com.